Hi, everybody. It's Susan again, and I'm back this time to talk about Venus coming into the sign of Scorpio. I thought I would mention it. I don't usually do all the planetary ingresses, but some of them are more interesting than others. And what I thought I'd talk about was why Venus in Scorpio is in considered to be in detriment. What does it mean when a planet is in detriment? Because I think there's a lot of understanding that's lost in modern astrology. So let's have a look at, first of all, the basics, the dates. She's coming in to Scorpio on the 4th of December, and she'll stay there until the 29th of December. And on the 29th, she goes into Sagittarius, obviously, the next sign. And it's interesting because then on the 31st, Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, will be stationing direct. And so Venus will be co-present with Mars, while Jupiter is stationing direct and Venus entering into the sign of Sagittarius enters into a square with Saturn, which is also ruled by Jupiter. So it's going to be quite an eventful period, that the last few days of 2023 and the first few days of 2024. Now, the problem is that this can go both ways. It can be good or bad because Venus, although in our interpersonal relationships, she rules diplomacy and harmony and so on. She also is traditionally the goddess of war, and all the more so currently while she is in the Mars-ruled sign of Scorpio. So we'll have to see. I really I can't even begin to imagine what this will all look like. I think that the Jupiter stationing direct and the direct motion of Jupiter would actually be an improvement overall. And especially as Jupiter will be sextiling Saturn. And so it looks like there could very well be some kind of a resolution, but I'm not sure that it would be an easy one or a lasting one with that Venus squaring Saturn at the beginning of January. What's the exact date? Hang on, I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, why not? The 1st of January. So it can be Venus squaring Saturn, given that both are ruled by Jupiter, can be a really positive indicator of something that is not comfortable but lasting, something that is it's kind of like a marriage for the kids. Do you know what I mean? Like staying married for the kids. So it can be a little bit like that. Again, I really hesitate to make any kind of global predictions. I will make an effort at doing that for 2024 in general. But as I don't need to tell you, we're living in really crazy times, extremely volatile times. That Mars Sun conjunction that we have today is in the United States first house, the Venus in the 12th house until the 29th of December can also indicate some clandestine talks. We can only hope. That can also be something extremely mischievous because Venus in the 12th house of any chart can often be up to no good. So who knows? Because obviously the US is a major influence in the global situation. It has its fingers in all the pies of where we find disruption around the world. Anyway, let's get back to this Venus because I wanted to talk about her as or him as in Indian astrology. It's a male. There is, of course, an archetype for Venus, which is based on her planetary ruler, the rulership. And of course, she rules Taurus, she rules Libra as well. But with regards to Scorpio, Venus is with reference to the Taurus, so in the opposition. So we take the reference from the sign opposite. When Venus moves from Libra, where she is the ruler, she loses a lot of dignity. So instead of being in the sign of rulership, she's suddenly now in the sign of detriment. And she is therefore in the opposite sign of her rulership. And so what it's like is if you think about, imagine Taurus as a person sitting at the table, Venus representing that Taurian person, is very comfortable because that's the nature of the person. It's the nature of that, the quality of Venus in Taurus. Very comfortable, very natural, seeking harmony, seeking comfort on every level, sensual comfort, peace and quiet, stability, not too much change. Especially once they hit their stride, once they get their comfort zone, they don't really want to change. Um, on the opposite side of the table, we have the Mars ruled Scorpio. And so Scorpio is about everything beneath the surface. It's things that we are not always aware of, that can be deliberate and it can just be unconscious. Um, where Venus is quite open and on the surface, if you think about the abundance of nature and the beauty of nature, the scorpionic energy is much more hidden, and it can be psychological, can be emotional as well, things that are not in our awareness necessarily. It's not that we cannot find out what the things are, but that they're not obviously in our awareness. And when we have that Mars energy under the surface, there can be a feeling of potentially, separation or challenge, or a feeling of a little danger, a little riskiness. This is what gives that Venus in Scorpio that kind of magnetic charm. It's just like this little bit of a bad boy, bad girl kind of energy that can be very exciting, very passionate, very, very intense, obviously, those scorpionic words. And so it's literally the opposite energy of what you're looking at when you're sitting across the table from any sign, always looking to the polar opposite energy from Venus being Mars. So the feminine going to the masculine. Now, these are archetypes. They are not about whether somebody has any particular gender. It has everything to do with the energy behind the archetype, which is either feminine and passive and soft and harmonious and cultivating life and nurturing life, or is it the masculine, outgoing, penetrating, and driven, separating quality, and potentially also aggressive, violent, etc. Now, when we put Venus in that mix, we're trying to combine two things that are very, very different. And so how do you find that harmony and that sensuality when something is so intense? Well, it comes in fits and starts. And so where the potential for dependency or dependability or reliability that Venus is looking for in Taurus is something much more stable, more solid, less complicated, more simple. The scorpionic energy can be much more volatile, more stormy. And so that energy coming from Mars can also throw up things into crisis and cause, unconsciously usually, cause some kind of crisis or some kind of um, pleasure tinged with pain. And because it's always seeking for something of more depth, not being happy with what's on the surface. And that Venus in Scorpio energy is always looking for something behind the scenes, or assuming something's behind the scenes because they themselves carry so much deep depth. Where Venus in Taurus might be emotionally quite on the surface, and sort of what you see is what you get. The Venus in Scorpio can be incredibly hidden, private, and not wanting to divulge, but they'll be extremely curious about you, for example, and that they'll want to know everything about you with that intensity that can almost feel controlling. And at times it can be, because there can be this energy of lacking trust. And the more complicated the emotional field, the more complicated the psychological field, the less trust there will be. And so there can be this possessiveness or controlling behavior in relationships as well, or around possessions, that can be even a response to trauma. So Venus in Scorpio can actually, in the natal chart, can show some kind of trauma, can show something that is indicative of whether it be family trauma or other kind of ancestral trauma that the person might be dealing with, or that is going on at the time that they are born, or just before they're born. So that can repeat, of course, in a person's life. The chart carries so many layers of meaning. And so Venus in Scorpio is really constantly testing, due to that lack of security, due to that lack of faith or trust in other people, partly because there may have been some wounding somewhere along the line. And these things can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, so there's the energy field is there in terms of lacking trust or lacking safety. And then that becomes something that is provoked unconsciously in their experience, which reaffirms this lack of trust and this need for more control and a need for more intensity, or a need to guard more jealously, for example. Now, all that I'm saying here, and I know you know this, I know you are thinking this, is that Venus in Scorpio rather, depends on the quality of Mars. Because she's not in her own rulership, we need to look to the ruler of the sign that she's in to understand her better. So just as it is today, as she's moving into Scorpio, we're going to look where Mars is at this moment, for an example. Of course, it'll depend on any natal chart, where Mars is, the quality of that Venus in Scorpio. Today, we have a Mars in Sagittarius. And Mars in Sagittarius is actually ruled by Jupiter. And as it happens, Jupiter is ruled by Venus. So there's this interesting triad here. So if this were a natal chart, for example, we'd be looking at a Mars or Venus in Scorpio that's quite intense and very sensual, very profound, very deep, but ruled by a Mars which is quite out there, constantly seeking something, some excitement, more change. So this could be a Venus in Scorpio that is looking for multiple experiences, multiple different types of relationships. And then ruled by that Jupiter, which is in Taurus, which has a lot to do with the genuine values of Venus, the harmony, the security, and so on. And so there can be a lot of seeking for security, in particular material security, but this can also be relationship security, romantic security. But it's a Mars in Sagittarius, and so this is almost like saying that you're like a dog kind of chasing at your own tail. So there's this kind of paradox there. This would be somebody who could be potentially quite unsettled in relationships without realizing why, because they're seeking for something that is difficult to find, because their desire nature is so outwardly reaching, when really what they're actually seeking is some kind of security. So I hope you're seeing where this is going. So the Venus quality, so whatever the Venus in Scorpio is, she will have a different quality based on what the Mars is doing in the chart. And the quality of that Mars, the dignity of that Mars. Obviously, if Venus is in the same sign as Mars, both in Scorpio, this will intensify the meaning of the Venus in Scorpio. Then we get a really true meaning of that Venus in Scorpio, that true intensity, potentially much more prone to emotional volatility, for example, much more prone to deep sexual desire, sexual experiences, etc. Now, if that Mars is in its fall, let's say it's in Cancer or something like that, then this can provoke something very, very different. It's not going to have the same qualities, and there can be some, depending on where the Mars is, there can be perversions, there can be some kind of difficulty in expressing passion or love. All kinds of different potentials are there. Notice that I'm using the traditional rulerships. I don't use modern planets, the outer planets, as rulers. I do find them extremely important, and I don't give them rulership. I find that they are way too slow moving to qualify for rulership over a natal placement. So far better to use the traditional seven planets for that. And I think you'll find that you can get a lot more specific information if you're looking for those traditional rulers, because they do have there's a sense to the rulerships, and they really make a lot of sense. And when you understand the sense of the rulerships, you realize how they interplay with the planets that they rule. And then you use the outer planets, for example, Pluto, which in modern astrology is given to Scorpio. It can be a complement to the information that you're looking for, but it's not guiding the orchestra, as it were. So the house placement obviously is really important too. In this particular example, which is just the ingress chart for Venus moving into Scorpio, Venus happens to be in the fifth house. Now imagine this is an individual's chart. So Venus in the fifth house, deeply passionate, very sexy energy, and working in such a way that she's very expressive, very self-expressed, fun-loving. Mars, however, is in a kind of a busy workaholic kind of energy in Sagittarius. Mars in the sixth house will be working hard, and so that Venus may be frustrated in terms of having fun. She's not going to necessarily get the same degree of enjoyment, let's say, as she could with Mars Sun next door in the sixth house, calling her attention to more serious things. And so that can lead to some kind of discussion, disputes, challenges, including even health challenges, that would put a bit of a damper on that Venus in Scorpio. We want to understand that a planet in detriment is an important indicator in the chart. Not that things will go badly for a person, but that the natural effect of the planet is not going to be straightforward. It's not going to be easy. I know there are a few astrologers who go so far as to say that the idea of a planet in detriment or in good dignity or bad dignity is old-fashioned, that it makes no sense. And I think that is coming from a misunderstanding of the beauty behind the system of understanding the qualities of these planets. It is always going to be the case that if a planet is in detriment or fall, meaning that it's either opposite its rulership or it's opposite its place of exaltation. So that planet in fall is opposite its place of exaltation. That is always going to give a more complicated, much more nuanced result. Although we're still talking about a benefic, it's still Venus that we're looking at here. I should be putting my cursor over here on Venus. She's not going to be as straightforward. And so there's going to be more complications. It's not going to be as straightforward. And if you're looking to see the results of a question, let's say, is this relationship going to be solid? Is this relationship going to be good? Will I be able to earn my living doing this, that, or the other thing? You want to add that into the equation. So we can't just say, oh yeah, Venus is in the second, you'll have a really strong income. There's going to be something that comes up because Venus is ruled by Mars. She's not on her own. So, for example, Venus in the fifth, ruled by Mars, she is always going to be with the quality of having to put more effort in. She was in the potential for children, for example. There can be complications around children because the Mars-ruled fifth house often gives complications in childbirth or pregnancy, can give problems around the children themselves or separation in terms of the relationship with the children, or there's an intensity of relationship with the children, or there's something related to loss, death, difficulty. Now, again, the house is everything, and the quality of the ruler is everything. So we're looking at something that is not functioning in in its best light. And that's the main point here. So the Venus in Scorpio is not flawed per se, but she's operating from a different agenda to a Venus that is in her own rulership in Taurus. So that emotional intensity, for example, can work very much in the favor of a Venus in Scorpio, because it allows Venus in Scorpio to have a great emotional intelligence. They see through other people, they get other people. But when I'm looking at that from the point of view of a natal chart, I look at why would an individual need to have that level of awareness? What's going on in the life of, say, the parents or ancestors or that individual, that they need to have that level of emotional intelligence and awareness. And that is likely because there's some kind of challenge in their environment that requires it. So nothing in the natal chart is for nothing. It's all serving a purpose. These are not random placements. They're part of a continuum, a story that is a continuation of many generations of experience. And so there may have been around the family some intensity or chaos, even temporary, around the time of the pregnancy or birth experience, where there may have been some kind of relationship difficulties, potentially money related as well, something that may have been pushing the limits of the relationship or pushing the limits of decency. It depends again on the nature of the chart. But whatever the excitement was, it required a heightened emotional awareness and a sensitivity to what other people are feeling. And so that individual has that. It's not a random gift that they get offered. It comes through hard work. And that's the point. The Venus in Mars is coming at a price. The Venus Mars ruled comes at a price. So it's not as straightforward and easygoing, happy-go-lucky as the Venus in her rulership in Taurus. So that Mars rulership will cause some kind of a disruption to the quality of Venus that can provoke a lesson, a need to learn something about trust, about honesty, potentially about integrity as well, and about relationship or social cohesion, because Mars is about separation, Venus is about harmony. And so when the two mix together, there can be some challenge there. There can be a difficulty in really being comfortable or trusting in a relationship. And so there's constant tests being thrown at the partner, or even at the friends, to test their reliability. They're testing the faith, as it were. So it's a bit of a game that gets played. Mars in its best manifestation is going to be a great mastermind. It's very strategic. It's about planning and looking forward, looking ahead, trying to understand, especially in that scorpionic way, trying to understand what is not quite apparent, trying to anticipate what might be coming. And of course, that Mars in its least favorable light would be manipulation. And that Venus in Scorpio can have that reputation as being, at the very least, strategic about how she might engage in financial or romantic or even business partnerships. And at the worst, very manipulative and therefore not entirely above board. So again, it depends on all of what I've described, the condition of Mars as the ruler of the Venus in Scorpio, and the house placement as well. And any aspects, of course, any other planetary aspects, hard aspects from a malefic planet, given that Mars is the malefic, that's already a hard aspect given she's in the rulership of that malefic. Or from the sun or from Saturn, for example. Those are going to show the quality of Venus in a completely different light. So it's a fixed energy as well. It's really going to be a test of that Venus quality to see where harmony can be found. So where in, for example, in Taurus, Venus is looking for harmony and continuity in the relationship, to the extent that that Venus can also subject herself, we'll say it that way, to things that she shouldn't. It just goes on too long. That Taurian quality of faith and you know, sticking with the partner or sticking with a situation out of loyalty, out of duty, that can backfire, because that means that there can be situations that really have expired that need to be moved on from, and they don't really separate themselves easily or change easily. Now, Venus in the Scorpio, with that Mars quality, it can be more like out of a feeling of anger or revenge or vengeance or jealousy, that the Venus is sticking too long in a relationship. So there can be an addiction to something dysfunctional, an addiction to something going wrong, um, an addiction to something that is not necessarily healthy, either emotionally or potentially even physically. And so that jealousy, the control, and so on, it's again that Mars quality of competitiveness. It's like trying to win, trying to defeat the opponent, but the opponent turns out to be your life partner or your best friend or something. And so that's a challenging one that's really worth paying attention to as well. Obviously, if you're looking at somebody's natal placements to try and understand that, you really want to see themes repeated. I look for a minimum of 3 things repeated in different ways in the chart before I can be sure what the quality of that is. So you would be looking for, again, the fact that Venus is out of dignity. She's in her detriment. She is she can be in a difficult house, for example, if that is in a Dusthana house, for example, 6, 8, 12, or if she's in a house where with other planets that are challenging, the malefics, or if there are aspects from malefics, or if there are a number of other planets that represent relationships and good communication and good longevity, etc., in connections with other people, and those planets are also dysfunctional, it's going to repeat the story. If this Venus in Scorpio, for example, is ruling the chart, then it will also suggest that the person has difficulty in a lot of areas of their life. And again, this is to some ears, it sounds like fatalistic. It says, why, you know, that just doesn't sound right. But the truth is that some of us have difficult lives, and some people have unbelievable stories. I mean, many of you are astrologers, and no doubt you've heard some pretty incredible stories. And so somebody with a Venus in Mars ruled Scorpio, it's going to have some stories. There's no doubt. And so we're not going to try and pretend that that things are all easy. And it's not to say that people with planets in good dignity don't also have their difficulties. But I, you know, it's not for nothing that I'm trying to point out the value in understanding the dignity of the planets and the behavior, let's say, of the planets that are not in good dignity. It's really helpful to understand that. Sometimes also being able to show somebody that things are inherently more challenging for them in a particular area of their life, it's a relief. Because they're like, what's wrong with me? Why is this not working? Why is it working for everybody else? And then the idea is to understand, to help them understand themselves and understand what the lessons are there. So it's not a punishment. It's not something that they're doing wrong. It's that there's a deeper understanding. Now, if we look at that from the point of view of the Venus in Scorpio, the lessons here are incredibly rich. I already mentioned the idea that they have a really strong emotional intelligence and a capacity to really understand people around them. And that can apply also to like psychology, for example, to helping other people, working through psychological issues, or working in terms of a therapy for people who are dealing with some really, really, difficult things. They're fearless and very resilient. That scorpionic energy comes through relationships. They will be able to stand by the most challenging events in relationships, and they will stick it out. And as I said, that can work in the wrong direction too, that they're sticking things out when they really should be moving on. But it can work very, very well. There's a lot of courage in that, a lot of potential for overcoming all kinds of adversity, not being afraid of walking headfirst into taboo areas that other people would be really disconcerted by. And another thing, for example, Venus in Scorpio could be an incredibly good money manager or investor, for example, somebody who goes into things where there's a little bit of risk, like this is a fifth house Venus that we're looking at here. That's somebody who would be really willing to take risks and do that for a living, do that for money, especially because we have the sun ruling the second in this particular chart, conjunct Mars, which is ruling Venus in the fifth. So again, the chart needs to be seen, but I'm trying to get across the principles here. So you want to understand that planets don't just rock up with a particular quality, or the signs don't just rock up with a particular quality. There is a reason that they have these qualities, and the reason is the rulerships. So they're hugely important, and the rulerships themselves are influenced by dignities. And once you really understand that pattern, you've understood an enormous amount about a natal chart or any event chart. So I think that's about what I wanted to say here. Venus in Scorpio until the 29th of December will be bringing some depth to connections, depth to relationships. Wherever you have Scorpio in your chart, especially if you have Scorpio placements, you'll be getting blessed by Venus as she's going through. She's still a benefic, so she's always going to bring something of value, something that connects, something that pulls things together in some way, even if that can come with a bit of a sting in the tail. And then if you're a Taurus, then you're going to get this opposition, and Venus oppositions can also be very strong blessings. It's a blessing coming from other people usually, or situations and events that are supporting from the outside, shining a light back onto you. I have dates also for when Venus is going to be exactly opposite Jupiter, since Jupiter is in Taurus. That's going to be on the 9th, and that happens to be when Venus is also conjunct the moon. So that's very interesting. So the 8th, 9th, 10th, Venus will be moving quite quickly. So she's scooting by, but 8th, 9th, 10th, Venus is opposing Jupiter, that she is ruling, and then the moon is coming along on the 9th exactly to oppose that Jupiter and conjunct Venus. And since the moon is exalted in in Taurus, where Jupiter is, that's a really interesting double kind of blessing. Venus and the moon together are really harmonious. That could be globally an opportunity for some kind of peace or awareness of a breakthrough in our global situation on many fronts. We can only hope, because as we saw with Venus going through Libra, even if she was in good dignity, she was there with the South Node and we didn't get anything out of her. Not lasting anyway. We had a brief ceasefire, and some discussions have opened up between Russian and Ukrainian negotiators. Ceasefire in Gaza that has been broken, or has expired, let's say, and has started again. So not looking very good anywhere really for the moment, although there is hope for shifting. Now, the other aspect that is standing out here is that on the 20th of December, Venus will be opposing Uranus So while Venus is in opposition to Uranus at about that 20-degree point, that is going to be quite volatile potentially. So again, I dare not pronounce anything about the circumstances that we are in currently in terms of our global situation. It's extremely volatile. We have a lot of edginess in the astrology right now. Certainly January will be perhaps an opportunity when Jupiter is direct, when Mercury is direct, that things will be a little bit more harmonious and moving in a better direction for all of us. But I'm not so confident about December. Yeah, I think I did mention everything else. 31st of December is when Jupiter is stationing. Mercury on the 13th is stationing to go retrograde back into Sagittarius, and so we'll be stationing direct on the 2nd of January. And at that point, Venus will be there along with Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius, ruled by a now direct Jupiter, which is ruled by Venus. So that mutual exchange could be very helpful. But it can also be something that is quite volatile because Mars will be there with Mercury. We can only hope that some kind of Jupiterian wisdom and Venusian desire for harmony, peace and harmony will win out over the more impulsive Mars. There we are. So with Venus in Scorpio, you have quite a lot of depth. You do have this opportunity now for you, even if you don't have Venus natally in Scorpio, you have this opportunity to smooth over or understand more deeply your connections to whatever the Scorpio house is in your chart. And especially if you are a Scorpio, enjoy this moment because Venus is bringing you a blessing, and that's always pleasant. Even if Venus is not in good dignity, she will still bring her benefits and blessings to you in her own little way. And so I look forward to hearing your comments. Be sure when you are referring to yourself in your own situation that you recall that what I am saying here is archetypal and it's not a personal reading. So there's no, this is not about slandering or putting down anyone with Venus in Scorpio. It's about trying to point out how the planet is not able to function at its best, at its peak, because of the rulerships. So I look forward to hearing from you in the comments as always. I'll see you again in the next video.